Okay, welcome everyone to a new episode of Myth Bust Monday. This week we're going to be looking at the idea that the knees shouldn't go past the toes in a squat because it's improper technique or more likely to cause injury to the knees. So this idea is pretty common in personal training circles, and I think it's one of those bits of dogma that have just gotten handed down over time without any real thoughtful consideration of the scientific literature. I think the idea probably originates from a 1972 study, which found that of the 12 study subjects, the subject with the greatest forward knee movement also had the greatest shear force on the tibiofemoral joint. So the joint that connects the tibia, the big shin bone, to the femur, the big bone of the upper leg. And shear force in this context just refers to a pair of opposing forces. So say one force that pushes the tibia forward and another that pulls the femur back. And if these shearing forces get too high, it can result in knee pain, and if taken to the extreme, ACL tears or other injuries. Now, much more recent literature has taken a hard line against this data set for not controlling for squat depth and not including a description of the squat technique they used, leading to the speculation that perhaps the shearing forces were due to a very upright posture. So with that preliminary paper aside, I'd like to say that first, and probably most commonsensically, I think the knees can clearly go past the toes without causing issues. For example, when you go down the stairs, your knees clearly go past your toes, but this hardly ever causes pain in healthy knees. Also, in sports like Olympic weightlifting, you'll very often see very extreme angles of knee flexion, with the knees way out past the toes. While injuries certainly do occur, many of these athletes don't experience any knee issues. But anecdotes aside, the main point that I'd raise here is that we shouldn't base technique guidelines for multi-joint movements, like the squat, by only considering the forces involved at one joint, in this case, the knee joint, while ignoring the forces at other joints involved in the exercise, so say like the hip or the low back. So in 2003, Fry and colleagues compared knee and hip torques in two variations of the squat, one where their knees were permitted to travel past their toes, and the other where a wooden board prevented the knees from moving past the toes. The squat was taken to parallel in both cases, and as expected, knee torque was greater when the knees traveled further forward, so in the unrestricted squat. So there was a difference of 150 Newton meters in the normal squat versus 117 Newton meters in the restricted squat. But just look at the difference in hip torque between these two techniques. There's only 28 in the normal squat, but 302 in the restricted squat. That's more than a 10-fold difference in hip torque just by keeping the knees back. And this finding led the authors to suggest that it is appropriate to permit forward displacement of the knees past the toes during this exercise to permit proper positioning of the torso. Obviously, this forward displacement must not be excessive, but instead should be carefully regulated. So basically, as you can see in the image, forcing the knees to stay back will force lifters to lean further forward, increasing strain on the hips and low back. So to me, this seems like a bit of an unreasonable trade-off, a slight reduction in knee torque for a massive increase in the potential for shear forces at the lower back. And this idea is supported by data from List and colleagues, suggesting that there's less stress on the lower back during an unrestricted squat than during a restricted squat. And practitioners shouldn't be overly strict with athletes or clients in coaching against anterior knee displacement during performance of the squat. So to make this a little more actionable, I think a good squat meets a few main criteria, and the knees not going past the toes isn't one of them. First, the heels must stay firmly planted on the ground. Moderate forward knee travel is okay as long as you aren't shifting your weight up onto your toes. Second, the weight on the bar must stay centered over the middle of the foot. This means that when you're looking at the squat from side on, the bar should travel up and down in a perfectly straight line. And thirdly, your knees should generally point in the same direction as your toes. They shouldn't cave in or be forced out excessively, except for in some advanced cases. So these are the main principles, and I would say the rest of the technique details, as I see it, will depend on your body's proportions, which is determined mainly by your skeleton, and that you really can't do anything about. So how much forward lean you'll have in the squat will rely largely on your femur length, especially relative to your tibia, and you'll necessarily have more forward lean if you have longer femurs. Your skeleton can also strongly affect how deep you can go and how deep you should go on the squat. And I think rather than endorsing a across-the-board ass-to-grass squat, the approach I recommend is to go as deep as you comfortably can, the goal of trying to reach, I guess, at least parallel as the sort of minimum standard for strength and size goals. But I'll digress there, and I'll wrap it up here by saying that the idea that your knees shouldn't go past your toes in the squat is busted. I will note that this doesn't apply to all exercises. So in the lunge, for example, I think you really should try to limit that forward knee travel because you can maintain a much more easily upright position in that exercise, meaning that trade-off between the knees and the hips isn't quite there in the same way. And of course, my recommendations here are meant to apply to healthy, active, regularly exercising folks. So if you are already experiencing knee pain, I think you'll want to get the counsel of an actual expert for that. But for now, I think I'm going to wrap that one up here. Many of you guys will know that I've made it a goal of mine to really increase my own strength on the squat and the other two power lifts as a part of my new plan for the rest of this year. And I am a fan of using proper training equipment. So if you guys are looking to get a new belt or maybe some knee sleeves to not only keep everything tight and safe, but also just help you lift more weight, you can check out the stuff that my sponsor Rise has to offer. I'll have a link down there in the description to some of their stuff if you'd like to check it out, and the equipment that I'm using in my own training. And this is a way that you can support me and take your training to the next level without any real downside or drawback other than price. So I'll leave that up to you guys to decide. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did enjoy it or if you learned something, don't forget to leave me a like. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you're new to the channel, and I'll see you guys all here next Monday.